and global role. There's plenty that's going on both inside Ghana at the moment to reflect on this, but also in Ghana's neighborhood, its near abroad and beyond. So this is a really important event to reflect on how does Ghana sit in the international system at the moment? What are the issues for Ghana? Obviously, we'll be hearing, I'm sure, about debt relief and how Ghana is going to be managing its economics, given the realities at the moment in Ghana and the request for Ghana to join the G20 common framework. This is a hybrid event, so we have many people online. Those of you who are on Zoom on that platform can send in questions. Those of you on the other platforms, my apologies, you're going to be able to watch this meeting, but you're not going to be able to ask any questions, so my apologies in advance. Given that we have media in the room and that we're live streaming, this meeting is a public meeting. There's no Chatham House rule involved here. Everything that His Excellency John Mahama says is on the record, and you yourselves, when you ask questions, that will also be recorded and reported and so on, so you have that opportunity. If you're tweeting, we'd love it if you could use hashtag CHAfrica. That would be really appreciated by us. And if you've got cell phones, mobile phones in your pockets, could you make sure that they don't ring and give us lovely music? We just want to hear His Excellency speak. I don't think I want to say anything more. As I say, I'm particularly delighted that His Excellency is back. I was reminding him that at the election where he didn't prevail, I was part of the Commonwealth Observer Group, and indeed I thought that election was a really important one, and the way that His Excellency at that time accepted the democratic will of Ghanaian people was something to be respected and applauded. And I revealed to him that I quietly went to the same church he went on the day that he had accepted defeat, and so quietly we all prayed for better Ghana at that moment. Excellency, I'll invite you here. Please open the water bottle yourself and speak to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alex, and your team for your kind invitation and for the warm welcome you've given me coming back to Chatham House. Let me acknowledge the presence of the chairman of our party, Honorable Johnson Asiedu Nketia, and several other leading members of our party, including my former finance minister, Honorable Setekwe. I'm happy to have been able to join you from Brussels, where I had a very productive discussion on the future perspectives in the framework of Africa-EU relations at the invitation of the European Strategic Initiative. It is gratifying to be back here at Chatham House, which through the Africa Program events has offered a wide array of African leaders across various fields a unique platform to discuss our continent in ways not seen elsewhere. The discussions here have helped shape international opinion for Africa and offered a useful focus on its most important subjects. I hope to continue in that tradition by sharing some thoughts on the continent's present outlook and future, while dwelling on the situation in my own country, Ghana. Africa's political and governance history is quite well known. However, on this occasion, it bears brief recollection to set the tone for an informed assessment of Africa's prospect and future trajectory. It helps a bit that I have a bias towards history, which I majored in at the university in my formative years. And as the famous British statesman Winston Churchill said, study history, study history. In history lies all the secrets of statecraft. Quotations closed. The African story is one that evokes immediate memories of colonial exploitation and domination with abundant, cheap labor to be used for raw material production and export to build the magnificent metropolises of the world. Centuries earlier, when we were at the short end of the stick in the slave trade, as our best and strongest found themselves bound in chains and bundled into overcrowded slave ships, never to return. However, by the middle of the 20th century, there had emerged a young cadre of Pan-Africanists determined to free the continent from its colonial shackles. And these young Pan-Africanists worked at the peril of their freedoms and their lives. They eventually launched a liberation struggle that reverberated across the continent. Names like Kwame Nkrumah, under whom my father, MAHAMA, served diligently as a Minister of State, people like Nyerere, Kaunda, Sekituri, easily roll off my tongue in this regard. Soon enough, after a spirited fight, colonialism fell in one country after another, culminating in the exhilarating liberation of South Africa from the worst form of colonial subjugation, which was apartheid. The result was the freedom for Nelson Mandela after 27 years in jail. Africa in the post-colonial era was awash with hope for a much brighter tomorrow. We were, however, soon to be enmeshed in a contestation over the most suitable development paradigm and ideology to follow. While some face west, others face east. We in Ghana, as famously declared by our first president, Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, face neither east nor west. We face forward and experimented along the line with whatever paradigm we deemed exigent at any particular time. Not enough time was afforded for these experiments to yield sustainable fruits, because a combination of disillusionment and adventurism ushered in military dictatorships and, in many cases, wanton misrule across the continent. By the mid-80s to the early 90s, it had become obvious that democratic governance and economic reform were imperative to overcome the suffering and stagnation that years of poor governance under dictatorships had spawned. Under the aegis of the Bretton Woods institutions and other multilateral partners, several African countries launched economic recovery programs with varying degrees of success. In the case of Ghana, I can say that through these reforms, we performed what could be likened to an economic miracle. From the throes of bankruptcy, hyperinflation, and years of negative growth in the mid-70s and early 80s, Ghana's economy was restored to the path of growth. Measurable and impactful progress could be seen. 30 years ago, we were even able to seamlessly integrate up to 1 million of our compatriots who were unceremoniously deported from Nigeria back to Ghana without causing too much of an upset to our economic outcomes. Of course, analysts and historians have suggested that the eviction was Nigeria's retaliation in 1983 to the dastardly deportation of other Africans, including Nigerians, under the Aliens Compliance Order of 1969. In the decade that followed that period, millions of Ghanaians were lifted out of poverty through progressive policies and interventions. Similar success stories could be recounted for other African countries. Between those heady days and now, the story of Africa has become patchy, even though progress has not completely eluded us. Civil strife, famine, genocide, and a relapse into bad governance can all be squeezed into the narrative that is Africa in the last few decades. At present, save for a few countries on the continent, our economies are largely still underdeveloped and underpinned by the colonial economic model of raw material exports and little manufacturing and industrialization. Fragile governance institutions and corruption remain major bottlenecks. Insecurity, terrorism, and insurgency have all reared their ugly heads across some countries on the continent. In the last few years, we've seen a resurrection of what we had believed to be an extinct specter of military takeovers in some African countries, especially West Africa. Mammoth unemployment and limited economic opportunities continue to confront especially the youth in Africa. This has been exacerbated by the youth bulge and is projected to worsen by 2030 if not addressed. obviously a threat to the attainment of Sustainable Development Goals and Africa's Agenda 2063. Africa, being demographically the most youthful continent, should have been an opportunity to be harnessed. However, the limited opportunities available to African youth has created a distressing scenario and culminated in the biggest threat facing the continent and the world at large. Africa has always been an opportunity that has never been in contention. What is in debate is the extent to which Africa has been an opportunity for itself and exploited its advantage for the benefit of itself. The story of the contribution of Africa has always been one of fascination. From its origin as the cradle of humankind, the continent has through the ages left an indelible mark on the pages of history. The echoes of the Arab Spring, which took place barely a decade ago, still ring in our ears and serves as too clear a reminder of what possible and probable danger the continent faces if the situation does not improve, and quickly so. The prevalence of cyber crimes, including internet-based fraud, which is popularly called Sakawa in Ghana, and other offenses spill beyond Africa and affects the rest of the world. This must be addressed head-on. The foregoing by no means suggests that there's no positive news coming out of Africa. There's a lot to celebrate on the continent. There are many thriving democracies in Africa, with some well-governed countries and strong economies. Information communication technology uptake is one area where strong growth has been recorded. Just before the COVID-19 pandemic, Africa was recording the fastest rate of new broadband connections, and mobile data traffic was projected to rise astronomically between 2017 and 2020, growing by about 46%, according to Statista. The e-commerce sector was also experiencing exponential growth as our population attained more awareness and became more reliant on online retailing. That said, there's still very much to worry about. It is a fact that Africa has suffered historical injustices like slavery, colonialism, and an unjust world economic order, which have held us back for centuries and deprived us of a level playing field to develop rapidly compared to other continents of the world. But it's no longer tenable to continue to blame these events predominantly for our present state. That will be absolving corrupt African leaders of blame for mismanaging the resources of the continent. We've had sufficient time and opportunities over the last few decades to change our story and our narrative, while crafting and implementing visions that will transform the lives of the over 1 billion people who dwell on our continent. Yes, globalization has its inherent disadvantages for Africa, but Africa can and must rise to the occasion by building and working towards continental unity as we strengthen partnerships with the rest of the world. To achieve Africa's Agenda 2063 goals, we must let the world buy into Africa's priorities and global role. In most cases, we have simply squandered these opportunities. Ghana, my country, also comes to mind here. In a little under 6 weeks from today, Ghana will mark 66 years of nationhood. Far from being an occasion to celebrate independence and the successes and achievements of nationhood, we will mark this day under the yoke of the worst economic situation, arguably in our history. We're currently bankrupt and burdened with a national debt we are simply unable to pay. You may have learned over the past weeks that the Ghanaian government has defaulted on servicing of both external and domestic debt. There's currently a huge uproar over a controversial debt restructuring program that which the middle class of Ghana could be wiped out if plans to have them forfeit proceeds of government bonds on which they rely for investment and sustenance are followed through. In absolute terms, up to about 6 million people could be deprived of their life savings and investments. Ghana's banking and financial sector could also be under threat of insolvency if no suitable adjustments are made to the debt restructuring plan. Our present economic situation, underscored by our bankrupt status, sharply contrasts with our fortunes over a little over a decade ago. At the time, our economy posted some of the highest growth rates in the world, with a robust and fast-growing non-oil sector. Too many of our economic indicators today are pointing south. We have in the last month entered the hyperinflation era with an inflation rate of 54%. Our currency has in the past few months been counted amongst the worst performing in the world, plummeting by as much as 54% in value within the first 10 months of 2022. Widening budget deficits have characterized economic performance since 2018. A severe cost of living crisis fueled by ever-rising prices of basic goods has imposed extreme hardship on Ghanaians as the government struggles to meet some of its most basic commitments in areas like education and health. Unemployment stood at a staggering 13%, the highest in recent memory. It will be no hyperbole to assert that our present state bears an uncanny resemblance to the period of the late 70s and 80s. How was a country with such bright prospects only a decade ago brought to its knees so quickly when it should have made far more progress? The present trouble with our economy stems from gross mismanagement and in some instances sheer recklessness. Government failed to sustain the gains made after our last IMF program, which brought stability into the management of the Ghanaian economy. Corruption has also contributed significantly to bringing us to this distressing juncture. Government has been quick to pass off the COVID pandemic as a reason for this poor economic record. Yet available data shows that many of our neighbors in West Africa and further afield posted much better economic performances than we did during and after the pandemic. The World Bank, through its Ghana Country Director, has also stated unequivocally that Ghana's economy was already in distress before the pandemic occurred. The purpose of recounting these failures, driven by mismanagement and corruption in Ghana, is to demonstrate how Africa depletes its scarce resources generated from both the continent and development partners. Instead of thinking innovatively to address the fundamental economic problems, many leaders, as a case study, my own country, Ghana, once a beacon of Africa, has come up for mention for dissipating domestic and donor funds. A recently published audit report by the Auditor General of Ghana into receipts and expenditures on COVID-19 exposes staggering instances of corruption running into billions of Ghana cedis. Over 21 billion was mobilized to mitigate the impact of the pandemic from the World Bank, the IMF, the European Union, the African Development Bank, Ghana's own contingency fund, Ghana Stabilization Fund, and from the sale of Bank of Ghana COVID-19 bonds. Hiding under the emergency of the situation, government jettisoned our financial and procurement laws and refused to use the GIFMIS system, which is the agreed budget and accounting digital platform, to avoid thorough scrutiny of the use of the funds. Such financial malpractices discourage the delivery of grants and concessionary loans to Africa. I've indicated that we need a forensic audit into the receipts and expenditure of the COVID-19 funds in Ghana. The forensic audit may be extended to other countries in Africa to restore investor confidence as we build the Africa we want. Let me add that Africa needs to build stronger institutions to address institutional and political decay. In building stronger institutions, civil society organizations in Africa must also be prioritized. On this note, let me commend many civil society organizations on our continent that are doing their job of holding governments accountable to the people. Compounding the socio-economic malaise on the continent is the erosion of public confidence in state institutions. Many of these state institutions, set up to be independent arbiters, and offer appropriate checks and balances on the executive arm of government have in recent years served more as extensions of government. In many cases, as is the case in Ghana, there have been overt efforts by the government to weaken these institutions and bend them to its will. A case in point was the ouster of the then chairperson of the Ghana's Electoral Commission and two other senior officials of the commission by the president over clearly flimsy and contrived reasons. They were then replaced with persons with noticeable leanings towards the incumbent party and whose actions have served to undermine public confidence in their independence and neutrality, two ingredients which are vital prerequisites for the sustenance of Ghana's democracy. Relatedly, Ghana's judiciary has also come under public scrutiny in recent years for what is widely perceived as bias towards government. Until the advent of this government, our judiciary had commanded tremendous public respect and confidence for their firmly independent posture. This is arguably no longer the case. And this is a worry to investors because one of the factors that boosts confidence of investors to place their money in a country is the faith they have that in event of a business dispute, they can expect the justice system to be a fair and neutral arbiter. For Africa to succeed in achieving her strategic priorities, we must strengthen institutions, including the judiciary, and grant them their deserved independence and freedoms as prescribed by law. I encourage you not to lose hope in Ghana and Africa, because it's far more useful to look forward into the future with hope than to brood over the present desperate situation. I'm an eternal optimist and a believer in the potential and positive energies of Africa and her young people. In December next year, what I consider to be the most important election in Ghana's history will be held. The electioneering period will offer a scope for deeper discussions about Ghana's future and what needs to be done to get us out of the current economic quagmire and to avoid a recurrence in future. We in the opposition in Ghana are very clear on our vision for the country and how to build the Ghana we want. The first order of business for a new NDC administration will be to restore macroeconomic stability and ensure fiscal prudence, while generating employment for many of our young people who are unsure of what the future holds for them. Though the current economic distress is largely self-inflicted, it is very clear that unless we act to insulate ourselves from these factors, whatever gains that are made going forward will unravel because of the existing structural weaknesses. The National Democratic Congress, the NDC, which is my party, therefore commits itself to immediate structural reforms based on a national dialogue and forging a broad national consensus that will lead to the diversification of our economy and its production base and the attraction of investment into industry, farming, agribusiness, the digital sector, and tourism. We are determined to process our natural resources like cocoa, gold, bauxite, oil, copper, while we build more robust capacity to respond to global energy shocks. I invite you to look favorably at Ghana again because there is hope ahead. I also urge you to partner Africa as we confront the challenges posed by climate change, emerging disease, terrorism, and cybercrime in order to build a safer world. Our borders are borderless because of globalization. Therefore, we must stand in support of one another. As we look into the near future with optimism, there are instant solutions that must be found to the crippling economic crisis which has left a dark pall hanging over Ghana now. At a continental level, I want to reiterate my international advocacy for a reinstitution and extension of the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, the DSSI, to afford countries like ours some limited fiscal respite. I will similarly call for an expansion of the common framework for debt treatments beyond DSSI to help African countries access debt restructuring tools and mechanisms. I've also had cause to state elsewhere, and I'll repeat that the time has come for an African version of the Marshall Plan. I note and applaud the Global Gateway Program of the European Union that seeks to mobilize over 300 billion euros over the next 7 years for infrastructure in Africa and the rest of the developing world. If Africa is to survive and be a source of hope for the rest of the world, then Africa, as an imperative, must speedily harness the advantages it has to ensure inclusive growth for all its people. With the continent boasting the world's largest free trade area, along with an over 1 billion person market, Africa is prime, as reported by the World Bank, to carve out a new developmental pathway. Under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, 55 countries with a combined GDP of over $3.4 trillion will work together to present major opportunities for shared growth and prosperity for Africa and the rest of the world. I expect the AFCTFA not to de-emphasize the prospects of small and medium enterprises as we promote new markets and encourage foreign investments. Small and medium enterprises have sustained Africa and will continue to do so for a long while to come. African Continental Free Trade Area will also need the support of the African Union for greater integration to allow for greater labor mobility across Africa to support countries in need of critical human resource. And the African Continental Free Trade Area must not allow businesses with political connections to be prioritized over real captains and champions of industry. Neither must innovations from the youth suffer because of lack of political connections. All hope is not lost for Africa. Africa, including my country, Ghana, has strategic priorities and is ready and willing to play its role in the global community. To conclude, it is also of critical importance that regional blocs like ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, CEMAC, the Arab Maghreb Union, and the African Union must be empowered to have a firmer grip on their member nations to address regional, continental, and global challenges. Other international bodies like the EU, the Tana High-Level Forum for Security in Africa, which I have the privilege of chairing, must provide the needed support, including oversight and scrutiny of activities likely to lead to serious crisis. I stress on this point of oversight because we have observed that the laxity in supervision and oversight has given free rein to some leaders on the continent to wreak constitutional tyranny on their people, with some of them going as far as changing their country's constitutions so that they can run for extended terms of office. No single country in Africa can on its own attain the highest level of development when surrounded by neighboring countries engaged in conflict. It is therefore important that there is stability and sustained development in Africa, which will help lead to global security and prosperity. With the right steps and visionary leadership, as well as a willingness to dig deep and find innovative solutions to the decades-old challenges, we must emerge a stronger force, a stronger continent to reckon with. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. If everyone sits down, we're going to have reasonable time for questions and for a discussion. There are lots of questions coming in on my screen also, so we'll do both. Excellency, you can sit, but answering questions, you do look a lot better and more handsome if you stand up. So relax for the moment. We'll take some questions, but with live streaming, you will get recorded for posterity too. So I'm sure you want to look your best. I think I need to go to someone I do know who is a friend of Ghana, and his hand is just there. He's got a scarf on. It's not a Ghanaian scarf, but it is nevertheless a Ghana, you know. And please do introduce yourself.
Thank you. Nick Westcott, former High Commissioner to Ghana, now Director of the Royal African Society. Your Excellency, I'm sorry I didn't bring the Ghanaian scarf. I should have brought my small. But thank you very much for that very stimulating talk. As you say, investors are hesitating at the moment to come to Ghana. The economic situation is difficult. And I noticed you were critical of the proposals to restructure domestic debt. But nevertheless, it's a real problem. And investors will be looking at what your solution is to this domestic debt, in fact, and the international. You mentioned some solutions to the international, but the domestic debt is particularly difficult. And do you think that the proposal for a Ghana compact to re-establish the sort of some economic consensus around the way forward is going to be part of that solution? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I've got two fairly similar questions online. I'm going to do those. We're going to have plenty of time, yes, and we'll overrun just a little bit also. So somebody who you do know, Excellency, Patrick Smith is from Africa Confidential, Africa Report, is asking, what more do you think the G20, IMF and World Bank could do to expedite debt relief and fresh investment in Africa? So not just Ghana. And then Roland Taylor has also been saying, well, if you'd not lost that election and had been president, what would you have done differently related to the economy? So let's take those three, and then the next round we'll focus on this room for questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Alex, I think I'll just stand here.
Yeah.
So.
That's the best.
Thank you very much. Nick, good to see you again. And thanks for your question. We worked quite closely together during your period in Ghana. And Patrick, thanks for your question on G20 relief and what would we have done differently. These are the three questions. I'm not opposed to debt restructuring. Debt restructuring is a condition precedent to getting an IMF program. And Ghana needs to do a debt restructuring to be able to go into a program. What has been the contention is a lack of dialogue and consultation with the debt holders on the domestic side. I know currently negotiations are taking place with the bondholders on the external side. Not the same treatment with domestic bondholders. Government feels it can just ride roughshod over them. So one fine Sunday night, we're all relaxed at home, and then we had the finance minister, address the debt restructuring and announce how it was going to be done. 0% in 2023, 5% in 2024, and after that, 19% in 2017, and then going all the way to 2035, without any consultation. I have been an advocate for dialogue. Before this whole crisis started, I advised the government, I said, hold a national dialogue on the economy. Give what the state of the economy is, and let everybody buy into it and understand. And then after that, seek a broad consensus behind your economic program. This suggestion was never taken. And then what we expected would happen actually happened. We had kept raising the red flag since 2019 about government's reckless borrowing program, going onto the Eurobond market every year for $3 billion and not investing it in the productive sectors of the economy, most of that money being used for consumption. And that is what has ended us where we are. And after you've recklessly mismanaged the economy, you don't want to make the same sacrifices. You're asking the people to make all the sacrifices. Sacrifice your bond, I'll pay you in 15 years. How do you know the person will live till 15 years? And yet, correspondingly, government expenditure is increasing. One would have thought that in this crisis, you're not going to increase your debt in this budget by 82 billion over last year. 2023 budget has seen government expenditure increase by 82 billion over 2022. That is not a government that is serious about making the same sacrifices. It is asking the people to do. And that is our concern with this debt restructuring program. Apart from that, you don't let the driver who ran you into a ditch after you've managed to pull the car out of the ditch, see him sit behind the wheel again. And I mean, the majority itself, members of the MPP, have said, take this finance minister out. Bring somebody who the public will have more faith in, and because he didn't create the crisis, they will be better able to have a negotiation and sit down with this person and negotiate in good faith. But the one who's caused the problem is the one you are asking to negotiate with bondholders for a debt restructuring. So that is our concern with the debt restructuring. Of course, government has applied for debt relief under the G20 debt treatment. We had thought that they would take advantage of the DSSI at the time it was announced, but because they did not want to be shut out from the international capital market, wanted to continue borrowing, they refused to access the DSSI. And that is what has led, now the international capital market is shut to you anyway. If you had undertaken the DSSI, it would have suspended your debt service and given you fiscal space. Probably would have been able to maneuver out of the situation in which we are. But they refused, and the same result that you were trying to avoid, being shut out of the market, has happened. You've been downgraded to junk status. Ghana's credit is at junk status on the garbage heap. Nobody is going to lend you money. And so unless we get the benevolence of the IMF to shore up our reserves with the 3 billion loan and hold the headmaster's stick over us to let people know that we're behaving ourselves properly in school, then our economy is in tatters. And so that's the problem. What we would have done differently, I would have not borrowed as recklessly as they did. We would have borrowed prudently and would have taken better management of our finances. I'll give you an example. In the election year of 2016, we faced an election, and we're going onto the bond market to borrow to cover some of our expenditures. We went for 750 million in 2016, and at the time, I remember in cabinet, our finance minister is here, said, several of our cabinet colleagues said, no, but this is our election year. Why are you going for only 750 million? And of course, the offers we received when we floated the 750 million were close to 2 billion. And some of our colleagues said, why don't you take all the 2 billion? We need the money, because it's an election year. And I remember that day, he was in cabinet. There was a fierce argument, and I had to protect my finance minister because he had explained to me that, look, we need to borrow with prudence so that we don't overheat the economy and balloon the debt. And so we took only 750 million in an election year, and that is the prudence in economic management. And that was the second year of the IMF program. The third year of the IMF program extended into the new administration's period. They went on the market, even while they were in an IMF program, for in excess of $2 billion. And after that, it was $3 billion, $3 billion, $3 billion every year. And that is what has ended us where we are. And so I do think that the debt restructuring, there should be more dialogue. I noticed that the period has been extended. I think this is about the third time. And one wonders if we'll be able to meet that deadline by the end of January. And the point is, the longer it delays, the more the danger that we'll not be able to go to the IMF board when it meets somewhere towards the spring. And so this thing must be speeded up, and the only way it can be speeded up if the finance minister climbs down his high horse and is prepared to sit with the bondholders and discuss it and reach a consensus.
Right. Let's go around the room, but it was important to discuss the economy. We may have some more questions on it also. I have to disclose that it's touched my own family. My son, his first job was focused on Ghana, and the company laid him off because of the economic problems. He's now on the market, but it just shows that it's spread, widely, and even touches my own family history. So the lady over there, please go ahead. Lovely to see you. Do stand up, introduce yourself, ask your question.
Mimi Achibade, former trustee of Chatham House, actually longest serving one. Sir, thank you very much. I would like to take you back to your point about history being important, because that, I think, rings true, especially when you ask about the role of Africa, and indeed the role of African countries in the world. My question to you is given this framing I'll give you, what do you think? How would you rethink it, or what would you think about the role of Africa? So, to my mind, when I take a geopolitical perspective on Africa and African countries, Africa to me is no more corrupt than East Asian countries. Africa does not have more outlandish dictators than even Europe. We talk about, yes? Or East Asia. So what is it? And I say to you, sir, that it is the geopolitical position of Africa. The Africa continent is not a buffer continent for any reason in the West. And African countries individually are not. Why? There are a couple of reasons. First of all, we embrace, as you've just spoken, democracy. So they don't need to bribe us to go for democracy. We are not natural communists. There are other reasons. So I want to say, given that, and looking at the future of Africa, and the fact that Taiwan, Japan, South Korea were given transfer technology so they can be buffer states to China, and that's why they're great. Ukraine is feeding Africa on wheat, which is not even a traditional wheat food substance for Africa, because they wanted it as a buffer state for Russia. What is it that we in Africa have that we can say, oi, this is us? If you don't, we're not giving. Thank you, sir.
Very much. So I'm going to that gentleman there. I know who you are. I hope, Excellency, that you read his magazine. He's going to introduce you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Jonathan Rosenthal from The Economist. Excellency, thank you for your fascinating talk. I think we're on the same topic roughly of geopolitics, but you spoke about stability in the region, you spoke about Africa's role on the international stage. Ghana itself has taken a principled stand with regard to Russia and Ukraine in defense of the Charter. A large number of African countries have not. We've seen Lavrov recently on the continent. We've seen South Africa fairly shamefully. And we've also seen some neighbors in your region bringing in Russian mercenaries. I wonder if you've got any observations on whether the continent broadly is playing a role it should be in these affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have a third question that's around this issue of geopolitics so that we kind of cluster it? You have? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really quickly, sorry, I'm Edward Adonteng. I was the founder and president of the Ghanaian Society at Coventry Uni, but I doubt you ever saw me, Alex. Really quickly, so Your Excellency, you were the chairperson for ECOWAS 2013 to 2015, if I'm not mistaken. I wanted to ask you, we've seen civil unrest in Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, the Casamance region, Guinea-Conakry. I wanted to ask you, on the topic of strategy, what is the direction that ECOWAS, in your opinion, should be going in? Okay,
thank you very much. There is, Excellency, one question online, which is from Abdul Malik, and it kind of ties in on what is for kind of middle level organizations like the Commonwealth. What's your vision for that? And you should be aware that we did have the Ghanaian Foreign Minister here recently, Shirley Bochwe, basically outlining her candidacy to be the next Secretary General of the Commonwealth, because the next Secretary General after Baroness Scotland will be an African. So what's your view of a Ghanaian becoming Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and your vision for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the question, looking at the historical perspectives of Africa. I think I agree with you when you say that we're no worse than other parts of the world, but I do think that part of the problems we suffer in Africa is because of the erosion of our value system. And what happens is, I would say every continent and every nation has gone through stages of development. Africa's kingdoms, when you study history, had political structures, council of elders, the chief ruled with advisors and so on and so forth. They held town meetings where the whole town was called into the village square and meetings were held. So we had our own political systems. Those were truncated when colonialism came. And as you know, the policy of indirect rule, it was decided by the colonial power to rule through the chiefs. And so the chiefs became the agents of the colonial power. And so that all changed the political systems in Africa. Once we emerged from colonialism, and that's why I said everybody decided to follow whatever path there was. And in those days, the leading ideological and political systems were either socialism or capitalism. And so Africa was forced to make a choice. And in those years, there was the Iron Curtain, and you had to show on which side you were. And so we conveniently formed the non-aligned movement, and many of us went and hid there and say, we rather look east or west, but we look forward. Yeah, we were looking forward, but to get assistance from any of the blocks or to cooperate with any of the blocks, you needed to show that you were in alliance with them. With regards to democracy, I think that democracy, freedom are universal human values. And even though we might, for our Africanness, try to be protective of ours, I mean, still, when you have a leader who's old and senile, he has no business continuing to be leader. It doesn't matter whether it's Africa or wherever. You know, when you have leaders who, I mean, have problems in terms of thought, you know, they have no business continuing to be in leadership. And especially when you have a population, a continent as youthful as Africa. 60% of the population of Africa is young. And so, I mean, why would you have 80-year-old and 90-year-olds, you know, still, I was going to say they should be home looking after their grandfather, their grandchildren, but I recently became a grandfather myself, so. And so values of democracy are universal, and we need to continue to deepen democracy in the modern world. And so I would say that, yes, we're proud of our African heritage, but the values of protecting human rights and freedoms is something that every human being aspires to, and we cannot rule that out. With geopolitics, well, Europe and NATO, I would say, have been occupied with the Ukraine-Russia war, and several times, again, we're called on to choose which side, you know, we're on. When Tigray and Ethiopia are fighting, we don't ask you, who do you support? Or when two African countries are fighting, we don't ask anybody in the world who you support. We try to intervene and resolve it. And so I think that the priority should be how to resolve the conflict. Of course, I don't believe that it is right for one country to make an incursion into another, because if we condone that, then you don't know where it's going to end. And so after Ukraine, who else? And after who else, you know? And so we must maintain that geopolitics. And I do think that the international bodies like the UN, you know, should be the arena where we dialogue and seek solutions to this issue. I studied in Moscow for one of my postgraduates in social psychology, and so I'm familiar with Ukrainians and Russians. And if I see two of them, I can't tell the difference between them unless they open their mouths and I listen to the dialect, you know. And so they are one and the same people, and unfortunately this war is taking a toll on lives. Women, children are suffering. We watch on TV every day, and I think that the time has come for some dialogue. I don't think that this war is winnable by any of the two sides. NATO and the West will continue to pour in arms to help Ukraine to hold its own, which probably is a good thing, to defend themselves. But this war is not winnable. It will eventually be solved by dialogue. Why make it eat up more human lives before we sit and talk? I think the issue about, and I'm sure you were talking about Wagner in Mali and other places, Central African Republic. I think it's all a discussion about the role of private military armies. And I do think that that creates threats to security. We have national armies. When you start introducing private military, then it goes into the whole sphere of mercenaries. And we remember in the 70s and things, Africa had a very bad experience with mercenaries, where they invaded, some countries to try and overthrow the government and things like that. I think that if there's a multiplication of these private armies, it could go into areas that we do not intend it to go. What the countries that are facing terrorism need is the support and equipment to be able to defend themselves against terrorism, the training and all that. And I think that that is the way to go. Ghana has a very good collaboration with UK, France, and the United States in terms of training against insurgency and terrorism. And I do think that African countries that face that threat, it should not only be the training and skills upscaling, it should also be supply of appropriate equipment to be able to defend themselves against these bandits. As chairman of the Commonwealth of Burkina Faso, I played a frontal role when Burkina Faso descended into crisis. That was when President Blaise Compaoré tried to extend his term of office, and there was civil unrest. The military took over eventually, and as chairman of ECOWAS, I had to lead a delegation there to help them establish a transitional government. And that's when President Kafando came as a transitional president. And then eventually elections were held, and it was handed over to President Roch Kabore. Of course, he got overthrown again. And it's similar to the case in Mali. There was insurgency and terrorism. And the armed forces believed that the civilian government was not prosecuting, the defense of the country enough against terrorists. And so the armed forces themselves took over. But there's no evidence anywhere in the world that the armed forces in control of a country, is better able to fight, terrorism or insurgency than a civilian administration. And it's been proved. The security situation has worsened in both Mali and in Burkina Faso since the overthrow of the democratically elected governments. We need to continue to be engaged. I noticed that the EU, of course, with the Malian authorities asking the French to leave and all that, I noticed that there's a certain disengagement, and the attitude is like, okay, you're on your own and all that. I don't think we should give up on those countries, because terrorism anywhere is a threat to all humankind. And so even though those authorities are going in a certain direction, I think that the world should still remain engaged with both Mali and Burkina Faso and give whatever support we can to be able to help them deal with the situations they face. And I think the last one was about Commonwealth. I'm hearing for the first time that our Foreign Minister is interested in the position of the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. I've worked closely with Baroness Scotland. She's chosen me to lead several election observation missions in Kenya, in Sierra Leone, and other places. And I know her well. She's been quite capable Secretary General. Incidentally, she comes from the Caribbean, Dominica. And so if it's Africa's turn, why not? I mean, if we have a Ghanaian Secretary General, female, it's something I would support. Thank you.
Okay, so the gentleman here, yes, sir, and we'll move this way and hope to have more time.
Hi, my name is Mark Boland. I'm a research analyst at Red Intelligence. I've followed the debt situation closely over the past 2.5 years. So there was a figure from an MPP official that they would seek a 30% haircut on Ghana's Eurobond holders and other external creditors. So if you were in office, would you seek a higher or lower haircut or the same amount, given the countervailing measures of, reducing the financial strain on domestic savers, but also to revive the Ghana's reputation as a global investment destination? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have a question that is also about finance that wants to ask it live, but isn't with us. So if we can unmute him and allow Carlos Lopez to ask his question, please. So hopefully he can ask it. I think he's in Cape Town.
Thank you.
Yep, please introduce yourself, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you, His Excellency. It's a pleasure to see you at Chatham House. I'm asking the question in my quality of Associate Fellow of the Africa Program. I just wanted to ask you about climate finance. It's now very topical. It's a discussion that is occupying a lot of minds and very much linked with the issue that you raised about debt. There is a consensus that major reforms are needed. And I wanted to seek your views about how Africa can build a common position to negotiate and navigate the difficulties that are going to be confronted during this year and the next year in negotiations about climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. And Carlos was the former Secretary General of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, if you didn't know that. The lady just here. We're moving this way in the room, and if we have time, we come back this side. We need to be... There's a microphone here, madam, please. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Excellency. Okay, I joined NDC because of you. No, seriously. I joined in 2012, okay? And sometimes people think that, why do you join a party? Reason why I'm using that as a platform was because you had foresight. You were talking about plans that you were going to do for Ghana, and it was more modern. Now, one of the problems that I think I continue to have is when we talk about democracy, we talk about finances, we talk about how Africa is run. As the lady said, we've got westernized people that they steal more than you can even think of, okay? We've got monies that when it's borrowed to the African countries, there's more interest on. Now, when we are looking at the structure of Africa and accountability, how do you do that? Because in 2019, I was at your Crossroads talk at Come to Ghana then, and you gave solutions, and they didn't take it, okay? Now, you know that the elections that we continue to have, it is more fraudulent, and it's more tribalistic. It is more, it's degenerating now. How would you put in place for the next election if you decide that you want to be a flag bearer? How do you do that? Because I was born here, and I'm looking for the next generation, because I do youth talks and stuff. How do we do that? How would you make that change?
Thank you very much. So, this far end of the room at the back, is there anyone who wants to ask a question right now? No. You, sir? Okay. And then we do one more round after this, and then we will have run out of time. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Al Hassan Sohin. I'm a member of parliament from Ghana, and I want to find out from His Excellency, when you were making your presentation, you did say that Ghana's economy was at a point of takeoff at the time that you were handing over. That is expected from anybody who had the opportunity that you had at the time. What is the evidence in economic policy that indeed Ghana was at a point of takeoff when you were leaving office? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And very quickly, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Off the top of their heads, they say we want a 30% haircut. One, you need to look at the whole debt, the structure of the debt, you disaggregate it, external, domestic. Then you must do a stress test and look at what the optimum debt relief you want is and in what period of time. And when you've done that, then you have a certain figure in mind. I don't know if that's how come they came up with 30%. But then the final figure would be based on negotiations with the creditors. And according to the rules, if you get 60% buy-in, then it shows goodwill that you'll be able to complete the negotiation. But you need 80% of people to agree that, yes, this is the way to go. We'll extend the tenure of our debt to 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. I mean, I don't know what the outcome of the negotiations will be. But to just say 30%, I don't know what research went into it. If I were in charge, I would have more figures. And that's the problem with this government. It's not transparent. They're not sharing information with anybody. How they reach that figure, nobody knows. You know, they just sit in the finance ministry and, you know, come up with any figures they want. And they just try to ram it down everybody's throat, unfortunately. Climate finance. I think there's too much lip service to climate change, solving the issue of climate change. Since the Paris Agreement, I mean, we all agreed in Paris the steps to take towards climate change. That was the first serious breakthrough. And we clapped, we're all happy. I was at that conference. Former President Kufuor was one of the interlocutors in that climate change conference. And shortly after, enter Trump, says, no, America is pulling out of the agreement. And so for the period of Trump, America starts reversing all the issues to climate change. And the sad situation is that of Africa. Africa has been the least contributor to global warming. And yet we face the most adverse effects of global warming. And so all we're telling the developed countries and those that are still polluting is that create a fund so that the adverse effects that we're facing, we can ameliorate and adapt to the changing global climate. And that becomes a difficulty. If there's a war in Ukraine, suddenly billions of dollars show up. If it is dealing with the single biggest threat to human existence on this planet, suddenly it's foot dragging and stinginess and how are you going to use the money and this and that, and all kinds of questions start coming up. And yet if it were Russia invading somewhere, suddenly EU, Britain, everybody would suddenly mobilize billions. It's not fair. I think that climate change, not Russia, is the biggest threat to human existence. And we must be more ready to apply resources to it than to provide tanks and aircrafts and things. So that's my thinking on that. Thank you for... She says she became political because of me. She joined politics because of me. But I think it's a...
I'm one of your chairpersons, your ex-chairperson.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that because there's a price to pay for aloofness. There's a saying that for those who, I've forgotten what exactly it is, but for those who refuse to participate in governance or something, the price they pay is to be ruled by fools. You remember something like that? Today, there are bondholders who said, I don't do politics. Me, I'm neutral. I'm not NDC, I'm not MPP, I'm not what. You see, when the disaster came, today all of them have suddenly jumped up. And yes, I mean, these politicians, if you had participated, we probably would not be where we are. And so everybody must take an interest in how your nation is run. And so nobody should be apolitical. Because when the disaster comes, when the bus crashes, you are in that bus. And the chances of you losing your life is higher probably than the one who was driving. You've seen accidents where a vehicle crashes, the driver survives, the passengers die. Yeah, that's what happens. With elections, we have elections in 2024. Our electoral system has safeguards for being able to avoid tampering with. And I know NDC is preparing to take advantage of all the instruments that will prevent anybody from rigging that election. 2020 was a very strange year. Because of the COVID exercise, the political parties, especially ours, didn't have enough time to train our party agents and all that and actually do the selection properly. Remember, there was lockdown, restrictions of people and all that. It was only in September that the restrictions were removed. So by the time the party went through the training program and all that, it was a bit too late. Aside from that, you always believe that the Electoral Commission will behave in a neutral manner. Yeah, unfortunately, even though we had worse fears that that will happen, that it would be more aligned to our opponents than before, we didn't know that that was the extent to which it was going to be, biased against us. And so this time, like I said the other time, we're going to be like Azuma. Azuma says he goes into the boxing ring with his own referee, and they asked him. And they asked him who his referee is, and he said his fist. He will knock you out, and when you can't stand, no referee can come and declare the fight for you. So we're going like Azuma with our own referee, and we will give a technical knockout. And once you are knocked out, you can't. Was there another question I'm missing?
That was the one from the MP over there.
Oh, yes. MP Suyini, Honorable Suyini. Yeah, thank you very much. The indices show, when we left office, if you look at the records, the debt to GDP was 56%. I mean, and from the projections this government is doing, they say the debt, if they do debt restructuring and go into an IMF program, it will take till 2028 to restore balance of 58% debt to GDP. Meanwhile, you inherited it in 2017 at 56% of debt to GDP. And so what other evidence do you need? When we were leaving office in 2016, all the multilateral agencies predicted that Ghana was going to grow at 8% because of the work we had done. And in 2017, it grew at 8%. And that's a credit this government is trying to claim. By the time you presented your budget and started implementing your programs, I mean, there's no way you could have influenced the growth rate in 2017. That growth rate was achieved by the heavy lifting that we did prior to 2017. And there's one significant fact that I've kept saying that nobody pays attention to. Under that program, for the first time in history, we had agreed with the IMF that we were going to do zero central bank financing. And so in the 2016 fiscal year, for the first time in the history of Ghana, or in the first time in the history of the Fourth Republic, a government implemented its whole budget without taking one single cedi from the Bank of Ghana. And so it's clear that by 2017, when this government came, we had achieved stability in terms of economic management. All they needed was to take it and move it to the next level. Unfortunately, this is where they've ended us. We'll take a last round.
This is the last round, and please, we'll just take a couple of questions and one virtually, and then that's it. And so the gentleman in the far corner there, you, sir, we'll do one.
Thank you very much.
Keep your hands up. I'll ask two more people, but go ahead.
So my name is Senyo Edu. I'm an auditor here in England. From my accent, clearly I haven't been here for long. So my question is on the Ghanaian economy.
I hope your accent won't change.
Definitely not. So I haven't been alive for a long time, but systematically it looks like our country has been under a vicious cycle of debt. This talk about going to the IMF, it's not the first time. My question is an open one over here. What's your approach towards revenue for the government in the future? And how do we look at sustainable debt when it comes to Ghana in the next couple of years? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the gentleman here, Yusa, and then we'll take one more after that. And I have one virtual one. That's
Thank
it.
you
Sorry
very much.
for everybody else. Go ahead.
Your Excellency, part of your presentation on the challenge we're having with management of financing and the debt in Ghana, you argued that the current administration has created a vortex, in your explanation, to quote you. They've created a vortex that consumes any volume of money that comes in the system. That is established. And now with the DSSI and all other institutions that you're seeking that we have financial support, is that not going to continue the system where finance goes into the system, get consumed by the vortex, and the nation never gets a success? In this respect, would you argue that there would be a need for an international system where after the administration, irrespective of the nation they go to settle, the global system is able to trace them, confiscate their assets, and reinvest it in the nation so that it will serve as deterrent? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yes, madam. No, sorry for everybody else. Also, we need parity. We've had a couple of male questions, and so we need a...
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, His Excellency, for your insights. My name is Vera Haibo, and I'm coming all the way from Scotland. Coming all the way from Glasgow, kindly permit me to ask 2 questions. The first one is about the currency in Africa. We all know how the cedi has been depreciating. In fact, this morning when I checked, a pound is like 15.5 Ghana cedis. I want to know if you think a common currency within Africa, for example, the ECO, would be a solution to some of the economic crisis we currently face. And my second question is to do with the role of the diaspora, Africans in the diaspora, in lifting Africa from the current situation we face. What role? We all know that those who fought independence for us, most of them were in the diaspora before they came down to fight for independence. What role do Africans currently in the diaspora, what role can they play to help resolve the situation we face in Africa?
Thank you very much. So I have one question coming in here from Dina Mufti, which is the following, Excellency. She's asking you, what is the most important lesson in your life?
Most important lesson in my life?
Yes, that's what she's asking you. Please.
Thank you. There's nothing wrong with taking debt. Businesses borrow, families borrow, you have your bank account. Sometimes you need a little credit to tide you over and to invest, and there's nothing wrong with it. It is getting sucked up into a vicious cycle of debts. If you have your credit card and you go beyond the limit, then it means that all you're earning is going to pay the interest on your credit card. And that's where we've landed ourselves. I think that we must be more prudent in our borrowing. And I believe that after we get out of this rut, we must put in a mechanism that tempers our borrowing, and that is able to cap especially non-concessional borrowing, especially commercial credit. When we're going through the IMF program, we put a cap on commercial credit or non-concessional credit of $500 million per annum. And so we never borrowed beyond $500 million per annum. We took concessional debt because the payments are more easy. I mean, it's like payment over 40 years at 1% interest, you know, and that is more soft on the economy. And so I think if we come out of this, we must, through some parliamentary legislation, you know, indicate some limits in terms of borrowing, so that tomorrow another finance minister doesn't come and borrow us back into the same situation we're trying to get out of. Approach to revenue, one of the mistakes this government did was when they came into office, the first thing, they accused us of nuisance taxes. And they said they were moving from taxation to production. And so they didn't need as many taxes, they were going to concentrate on production. And so they canceled almost 18 taxes that existed before they came into office. Aside from that, very narrow-mindedly, because the president had promised, he had criticized me of having high electricity and water tariffs. He said when he comes, he's going to reduce electricity and water tariffs. And when he came, he did. Residential consumers reduced by 17.7%, non-residential consumers by 30%. Now, what he forgot is that the state utilities in Ghana, are state-owned. And so if you reduce that tariff, those were commercial tariffs, if you reduce that tariff, you create a deficit. And that same deficit is a liability on the state. You have to find money to pay it. And so they did that, and the utilities all ran into debt. And eventually that debt of the utilities has come back to haunt this government. So recently they increased by 22% electricity. Then recently, just I think starting February, another 29% increase. So what was the use of that 17.7% decrease? By now would not have had to increase by this much. Then the worst one was during elections. They gave free water and free electricity. And so free water, free electricity. And I think it was Kwesi Pratt who said, hey, this free water, free electricity, it's not free. Someone must pay it. And I'll be surprised that if you are called to pay it, as soon as the elections were over, 1% COVID levy. He said, what is it for? He said, oh, to pay the free water and the free electricity. You enjoy it. You know. So I answered the debt vortex question. And he also had an addendum about where people have mismanaged or misappropriated state resources and they run away. Is there a system to bring them? I think it exists already. Happily, the Western countries and the developed countries are cooperative in terms of helping to trace people who have stashed away, state resources, and to help governments retrieve them. You have to establish that those resources exist or they acquired them illegally. And normally if you apply to the country where they've gone to seek refuge, you are able to retrieve that. It happened in Nigeria with Abacha. Some of the Abacha wealth was repatriated. So it's something that can be done. There are even mechanisms through Interpol and other things where if somebody has committed a crime, you have the possibility to have them extradited back to come and face sanctions. So that shouldn't be a problem. Depreciating currency, like I said, yes, our currency has depreciated, and for many years we've been trying to forge a common currency amongst the remaining West African countries. As you're aware, the French-speaking West African countries have the CFA, and the CFA is more stable because for a long time it had a link to the French currency. Aside from that, they have a common central bank that regulates the value of that currency. And so it gives them more stability when it comes to that. And so our intention had been to create another currency for the English-speaking, including Guinea, which was not on the franc, on the CFA franc, to create another currency and eventually merge all of them into one common currency. Unfortunately, progress has been very slow. You need to achieve what they call convergence criteria. And in our time, we had achieved the convergence criteria. But with what has happened now, with our deficit where it is, our debt where it is, it means we backtracked. We have to work at it again. Nigeria has to work at it again. All the countries must reach within a certain bracket before we are able to merge the currencies. But with the African Continental Free Trade Area, they're trying to come out with a digital payment platform that makes it easier for us to transact business amongst ourselves. And if that happens, it would help, in exchange, in the West African sub-region. The most important lesson in my life. This question has taken me by surprise. I just really don't. I can't put my finger on anything. I think that I learn life's lessons as they come, and you learn those lessons in different areas, in terms of human relationships, in terms of environments in which you are, in terms of many other things. So it will be very difficult for me to put my finger on one single thing and say it's the most important lesson in my life. But I guess that we keep learning and we keep taking experiences in life, and I make sure that those experiences guide me in future. For instance, I mean, since I left office in 2016, I've been thinking through my head, what could we have done better? What did we do good that we could have even, done better? What mistakes did we make that we could correct? And several things come to my mind, and one of them is that we were not as forceful in letting the people see what we had done for them. We assumed that they would see it. And so we did quite a lot, and during the elections, one of the contentious things that came up in our politics was that with the help of my team, and Dr. Omani Boama played a very good role in that, we compiled all the achievements, because somebody said, look, you've done so much, but nobody can see it. And so we compiled all the achievements into what we call the Green Book. And then we published the Green Book and distributed it. And you know what our opponents did? These are photoshops. This hospital does not exist. They said we went to Dubai and took pictures of various projects and put them in the Green Book. But today, I mean, I get people who come here and say, oh, so that hospital in Legon exists. I said, but what do you think? You think that we would have just gone and told a lie that it didn't exist? And so maybe next time NDC gets a chance, and our leadership, we should make it a point to let the people know what we're doing for them. And I think that the people will appreciate it better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Alex.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. If everybody can just remain seated, President Mahama has to go to another appointment now. But thank you very much for coming to Chatham House. And thank you for everybody who's been live streaming and been watching this. Okay.
Thank you, Alex.
Okay.